Many of us, our sales years coincide with the calendar years. Not for everybody. I realize there are some of you on the line that I know your calendar year isn't the same as your sales year. However, even if your sales year isn't aligned to the calendar year, often our customers' buying cycles are aligned to the calendar year. So whether this is the end of your year or just the end of a quarter or just the end of a period, oftentimes our sales are skewed this year because of our buyers as well. So today we're going to talk about some of what comes up and some of the common questions that we get asked at this time of year, which is, Julie, how can you help my people close more business as we get close to the end of this quarter or close to the end of the year? And we're going to talk about how I respond to that question when often asked. So first of all, I invite you all to join us. If you haven't connected with us on, happy clicker here, on Twitter or LinkedIn, etc. Oh boy. Please join us on one of these things and share your comments. What we're going to talk about is how to prepare for the year end at this point in time. Is closing the sale or skill or process? And I'm going to talk about that in the context of the reality is it's both. And we're going to address this in the context of 10 questions we must ask ourselves for each opportunity that we have in our pipeline to make sure it is on track to close as we want to close them. And then some of the tactics and strategies and the gotchas that you all should be thinking about as we come into this time period. Now, here's something that I firmly believe is true. Closing a sale is not a discrete event or a discrete skill set that has to be acquired by the salespeople. Often when we find out that a deal isn't closing, it's not because the sales rep doesn't have the guts or the courage or the ability to say, hey, are you going to buy this week? It's often because they have missed something earlier in the sales cycle that ultimately becomes a barrier that they have not identified. So we're going to talk a little bit things on that context. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do as we go through this. Think of a specific opportunity maybe in your pipeline that you are trying to close this year. And we're going to go through this process, and I want you to be very specific in terms of how you can identify the gaps so you can identify what you might be able to do today in order to eliminate that opportunity from the ability to close it later in this year. Better to know on November 18th that something isn't going to close and move on from that than find out that it's not going to close on until December 31st. So when I said that oftentimes things are missed in our sales cycles, what I meant is a well-executed sales cycle or selling process reverse engineers how our customers buy. And how they buy is what we want to manage as a sales professional. So our job as a sales professional is to ensure that we understand their buying process. So what's going on in their business that's creating problems that can be solved with our solution? And our ability to understand that, I apologize, there is some wacky animation in this PowerPoint deck that I didn't catch. So I'm going to keep going back and forth and see if I can't figure that out. So what's going on in their business that creates problems that we can solve and leads them to our solution? What's the value of solving those problems and addressing that business issue? Are we having those conversations with the right people? And most importantly, do we have a mutual plan, keyword being mutual, with the buyer to help them solve those problems with our solutions? The plan becomes critical in our forecasting process. So let's start with what are the top 10 gotchas that come into whether or not we can close a sale? Well, the first one is, are we actually dealing with the person who has the authority and the ability and the empowerment to access the funds, spend the money, execute a purchase? And if we're not, where are we at risk? And so that is the number one reason still that we see deals stall. I'm talking to somebody who wants to do this, but ultimately they have to convince somebody else, or they are not solely responsible for making the decision. And even if they're responsible for making the decision, they might not be responsible for executing that decision. So the number one gotcha when it comes to this time of year is, are we at power? Power being the person or individual who has the authority to access the funds and spend those funds. There may be times where we are willing to forego getting to power because we have a strong champion, a strong coach, a strong sponsor. That may be a business decision that you make as a salesperson. However, that puts us at risk, and we have to assess that risk and then make business decisions around it. So what are some of the strategies that we might be able to use? Well, we talk about our questioning process to identify power. We talk about triangulation as a mechanism to validate power. And we talk about bargaining or negotiating to gain access to power. So those are some things that you might want to think about if you are not at power today. The second reason that we often find that deals stall is that we haven't done a thorough enough job at understanding what's their reason to change. I haven't talked to a salesperson on the planet who doesn't know, hey, I've got to go find a problem that I can solve. I've got to uncover the pain that those prospects might be facing. But the reality is, in the B2B world, no matter who you're calling on, not all problems are created equal. And quite frankly, not all problems are worth solving. I'm sure many of you could enter my office and point out things in our processes and our technology stack and our infrastructure that could be improved upon. But if that is not something that is top of mind to me as an executive running this business, I might not put forth the energy, the resources, the money, the time in order to fix that. So we talk about making sure we understand that what the business issue is facing the client. What is going on in the business that your solution can impact? And how will that customer measure the impact? Because not all problems are worth solving. So it's really critical to understand what that business issue is. Now, in most cases, the business issue could be, will be a business metric. It could be making more money. It could be keeping more money. It could be cash flow, or it could be some level of compliance that organization is faced with. Regardless, it will be a business metric that is measured by that organization. So making sure that we understand that becomes the reason for that prospect to change. And in the vacuum of knowing what the business issue is, we often are we could be solving a problem that's not worth solving. And when we're solving a problem that's not worth solving, the value becomes questionable in the client's mind. As a matter of fact, this is one of the things that we talk to when we hear from a client. You know, we're really successful at getting in and talking to clients. However, we're often pigeonholed as a nice to have solution rather than a need to have solution. Well, if you are nice to have as opposed to needed to have, that likely means that you are not connected to a recognized business issue there where there's enough value to impact a change. The next area that we work with our clients on in this time of year, and often why deals stall, is because our solution isn't differentiated. We think there's another way that we can do this, or there's a multitude of ways that we can do this, and we haven't identified which is the best way for us to do it. So being differentiated in a customer specific scenario in an opportunity that you're working is very different than being different. So I'm often asked in a sales cycle when I'm selling value selling, hey, Julie, what is different about your solution? Well, how I answer that could very well be different, no pun intended, depending on who I'm talking to. So if I'm talking to a large global organization, my differentiation might be the global nature of my delivery. The fact that our programs are translated into 17 languages and we can deliver seamlessly around the globe so that every sales rep on your team, whether they're in China, whether they're in India, or whether they're in the US, has the same experience and gets the same content in a world-class experience. But if I'm talking to a company here in San Diego, which is where I happen to be, where it's a very local sales team, globalization would not be a differentiator that they would care about. So in that case, I might talk about our local ability to support them, our integration into their technology stack, our ability to align to their managers. So differentiation becomes, again, another customer specific process that we have. But the question you need to ask yourself in the deals is, do I know if my customer thinks that we're the best alternative? Do I know if the customer thinks my solution, my company, what I'm proposing is the best alternative? Because if they don't, and you become more commoditized, or you're not considered the best differentiated solution, that could very well derail your deal. So let's move on to the next one, which is personal motivation. Do I know what is motivating power or the individual that I'm talking to? Everybody is motivated, but they're motivated for their own reasons. And to the extent that I, as a sales professional, can understand for the individuals that I'm calling for on and speaking with, what's important to them and what's motivating them, the more effective I'm going to be to use that motivation to create urgency. So for example, I had a client recently that was incredibly risk averse. And once I understood that their motivation was really risk averse, did not want to make a mistake, and that manifested itself in very rigorous negotiation and a couple of other behaviors out of that buyer, but I could turn that risk aversion into a reason for them to move forward. On the other hand, I've had clients that are very want to be quote unquote trailblazers. They see themselves as the leader, as someone who's going to be first to do something, and how we sell to them is very different. But understanding the personal motivation is really important, because people buy from people. And I know many of you on the line are in B2B sales, or maybe you're selling to businesses, maybe you're selling to school districts, maybe you're selling to government agencies, maybe you're selling to higher education. All of those are a B2B sale in our specific world, but people make buying decisions, not businesses. So we need to understand how we can support those people as we go through this. So awesome. And then another reason that often comes up is, is it worth it? At the end of the day, our clients come to the value selling framework because they want to be able to compete on value. They aren't the low cost alternative in their class. As a matter of fact, recently I was working with a client and I asked them on a Zoom call, just like this, raise your hand if people choose you because you are the low cost alternative in your space. And not one hand went up. and including mine, because I have never worked for the company that is the low cost alternative in what I'm selling. Now, that doesn't mean that our price isn't fair. Our price is fair because of the value we can add to our clients. But we want to understand how the customer will describe, is it worth it? The difference between knowing what your value proposition is and value selling is your value proposition is your macro promise to your target market of the potential value you can bring. We save clients time and money. We save money in this way. We improve productivity and eliminate manual error, which could be costly. Whatever that value proposition is very important to understand, but it's different than value selling. Value selling is taking that value proposition and quantifying it in real dollars and cents for a specific customer in a specific scenario in a specific use case, so they can look at your investment and look at that value that you and they agree on can be achieved in doing business with you, and make sure that it is worth it. Obviously, we want the value to be higher than the cost. And it's a very specific process and goes way beyond understanding the value proposition. So we're halfway through our top 10. So Julie, do we have any questions? Or if anybody has a question, please, or comment, let's shout them out or type them in your chat or Q&A, and we'll address them. Julie, do we see anything here?
You know what? I think I forgot that to remind everybody of that, but because usually, you know what, I see a lot of regulars here, and they're usually throwing these questions at us. So come on, put those questions in, and then check in with me here shortly. I'm sure we'll have a few.
Perfect. So just, top 5 reasons that deals stall. We need to understand that. And we're going to go into the next 5, which are critical. Now, those of you that are familiar with the value selling framework, you're going to notice that there's some real consistency with our approach to how we create, qualify, and advance opportunities. And it is all aligned to that buying process that I shared with you at the beginning of today's session.
Hey, Julie, do you want to pull up for one now? Because you know what, we just got a few.
Perfect.
And this one's a great one. Francisco, thank you. How do you negotiate to get to power?
How do you negotiate to get to power? Great question. So the reality is that often during a sales cycle, buyers, or the people that we do have access to, want things from us. They might want a demo. They might want a reference. They might want more of our time. And anytime they are asking for something from us, we want to think about, what do we need from them that can help us shorten the sales cycle or more effectively qualify the opportunity. And often access to the ultimate decision maker, decision makers, or what we call power, is one of those things we can negotiate for. So if somebody's asking me for a customer reference, I am going to ask in return for access to power from that. If somebody's asking me for a demo, in return for that, I'm going to ask for something or a way to get to access. But so that is the whole concept of bargaining or negotiating for power. I have seen many, many sales reps where the prospect, it's like the tail wagging the dog. Sometimes, where the prospect is just asking for stuff and asking for stuff and asking for stuff, and the sales rep is jumping through hoops and doing all this work, and comes to find out that person isn't even the ultimate decision maker and isn't even putting that stuff in front of the ultimate decision maker. So we just want to get proactive and make sure that we are understanding that. The key to that question, though, is you have to identify that the person that you're with is not power. And so one of the ways we do that is through asking a lot more questions and not just taking those initial answers. Yes, it's my decision. Taking that answer at face value. Well, what happens after you make the decision? Have you ever made a decision of this size or magnitude before? And digging a little bit deeper with our open and probing questions in order to get to the point where we might identify that additional negotiation is needed. So, Julie, are there any others or should I move on?
Well, we do have one from Anthony, and
Okay.
thank you, all great tips. So here's what Anthony, so he did also ask that same question, and then he added another one on there. So how do we turn a gatekeeper into a champion?
Haha. Well, the first thing is I think we've got to stop thinking of them as gatekeepers, because that just has a negative connotation, and it makes me think of, the guard at the gate with the drawbridge down saying, halt, no entry here. And we've got to start thinking of them as a bridge builder. So what's in it for them? And how can we partner with them? So sometimes we almost have to use a little our selling techniques on that individual, not to get the deal, but to get to the next step that we hope to get to, which might be access to an ultimate decision maker. And I also think that we just need to be honest with ourselves when we're not there. It's oftentimes when power is the barrier, the sales rep is surprised. And as my colleague Rick McInich reminds me all the time, surprises are for birthday parties. They are not for forecasts and pipeline reviews. So we don't want to get surprised, and we want to ask enough questions to identify who real power is. And then if there is a legitimate reason or a reason that we are blocked from them, we can now make business decisions on how to proceed. For example, if I don't have power and I am stuck somewhere, I would probably be reluctant to forecast that opportunity. When we don't have access to power, we're shooting in the dark. And so we want to make sure we understand that and then make business decisions. I might still work that opportunity, but I know there's risk in it. And so that's part of the challenge with that. Okay, Julie?
Thank you. And I want to just let everyone know, keep posting those questions. We're going to stop it here at the end shortly and answer more of these. So thank you, Julie.
Awesome. Okay, moving on to number 5. Do we know how the buyer buys? And as silly as this sounds, it's really important that we get very deliberate and understand what their processes are. So, for example, the evaluation process might be very different than the decision process, and that might still be very different than the procurement process. Some of those processes, depending on what you sell and who you sell to, could be very deliberate processes where the evaluation process and power can shift in those processes, but we want to understand that. What happens after they select a vendor? So for example, is what other qualifications might you need to go through? And just as important to that, as we come into the holiday season, how long does some of that stuff take? So I had a customer a few years ago that got burned because she thought everything was on track to close her deal in December. What she didn't know is that her own legal department would not review any new contracts after December 10th. And when I say new contracts, they wouldn't review any language for contracts that weren't their own, because their legal department was so busy closing their own business and redlining agreements with their potential customers. They had a freeze on any agreements that were them buying stuff. And so that deal stalled out, and they were surprised by that piece of information. So do you know what has to happen? Who needs to get involved? And are there any barriers to that moving forward in the time frame that you're looking at? Another thing to consider is what does happen in that buying process is often other people do need to get involved. What is their schedule like? So are there some things that we can start doing simultaneously? So for example, if I know I'm getting close with a client and we're down to negotiating deliverables and some of the big buckets of what's going to be in that contract, I might ask, can we get our standard services agreement or confidentiality agreement or whatever that you call those agreements, can we get those getting reviewed by your legal or procurement simultaneously so that we can save some time? Because coming into this, we are going to run out of time, and that's time is not our friend as we come to the end of the quarter of the month or the year. In the US, there's a good number of people that will be taking off multiple days next week because it's a major holiday here in the US. And then coming into the holiday season of December, everybody's holiday schedules, vacation schedules, even in a pandemic, there will be some people that are taking off even if they can't go anywhere, but understanding that is important. Early on, I talked about the plan. The number one thing, let me repeat that, the number one thing that a sales rep can do today with their prospects is to build a mutual plan and timeline with that prospect. And we suggest you use backwards thinking to do that. So we start with the end result in mind, and the end result is the value or the impact that the customer expects to realize. So we start there, and then we back into all of the things that have to happen in order for that prospect to realize that value. And we do that with dates. So if you want to see an impact from the cost savings that you expect as a result of doing business with me and buying my solution, when do you want to see that by? Do you need to see that by the end of the first quarter of 2021? The second quarter of 2021? What has to happen to do that? Well, we have to have a kickoff meeting. We have to do training. We have to implement. We have to do maybe sandbox testing. Maybe we need to do get a customer success manager and do some customization and build the UIs and all of those things. All of those things take time, and we want to back into that so that we can ultimately say, in order to achieve this, is it reasonable and can you commit that we have a decision by December 1st? Is it reasonable, and are you willing to commit that you would be able to execute on that decision by December 5th? And we use that backwards thinking to create this timeline. And then as a salesperson, we confirm all that information in writing so that there is very little room for misinterpretation or misunderstanding between us. And so that plan becomes critical. As a matter of fact, we have a number of clients that come to value selling specifically with the objective of improving their forecast accuracy and learning how to write these plans, which are really customer-specific sales tools to help drive urgency and confirm that they are going to buy. So the plan is critical. Number 3, understanding timing can be really powerful at this time of year. I know in our world, we're often very flexible this time of year. Do you want to pay for this with $2020 or $2021? Do you want to split it between 2020 or 2021? Can I be flexible? And these are questions for all of you to be asking your own management. Are you empowered to get creative with billing terms? The flip side of that is we may have some clients that have some year-end budget dollars that they have to use. So years ago, Julie Brecken, you may remember this because at the time you were a client of mine, I did a similar session with a client, and a couple of their sales reps just started calling all of their clients and saying, hey, by any chance, do you have any year-end budget dollars? And, can we put that to work for you in terms of getting some value? This particular sales rep closed, I think it was 2 or 3 deals that weren't even in the pipeline in mid-November, by December 15th because he got to people that had some year-end dollars. So depending on what you sell, maybe it's, hey, can we add, for those of you in the SaaS space, can we add more seats? Can we extend those seats? Because there anything that we can do to take advantage of those year-end budget dollars? Or the flip side of that, can we delay our billing into the first quarter and have you buy today, get started today, pay later? So understanding that can be really important. And if you have the ability to get creative, you may be able to create some opportunities today that don't even exist, that you hadn't even thought about. We have 2 left to go, so let me go through those real quickly. Are there any unaddressed objections? I spent some time earlier this week. I do some mentoring with a university, the University of Colorado, with some of their sales students. And the topic this week was objections. And so we started talking about objections. And I really think objections fall into 3 buckets. The first bucket of objections is just a question where they need more information. They just need more information. They might be asking a question. It might sound negative, but they just might not understand everything that you do or how you can do. So that is one category of objections that we want to address and understand. A next type of objection might be because they're comparing us to something else. So it could be a result of some of that differentiation or the fact that they're looking at various alternatives. And because maybe a competitive alternative is being positioned one way, it could raise those questions. Those questions are important to address because those could be a barrier to sale or preference for doing business with you, more importantly. And then there's another category of objections that, quite frankly, are just negotiating tactics. And we want to understand those objections as negotiating tactics, as a unique animal. But we do address those objections. Any unaddressed questions that a customer has will slow down the purchase. It'll slow down the decision. If there's a doubt or a question in their mind, they won't take action. Confusion, a buyer confused is a buyer who does nothing. So if they're confused, and I know I do that, if I'm confused about the alternatives facing me, I literally will table it. I don't even want to deal with it. So that is true, I think, of many buyers in this world. Confusion will freeze all purchases. So we look at this approach to really identify what type of objection we have and where is it. And then if it is a negotiating tactic, it's really important before we address that objection to isolate it. In other words, is there anything else? And really understand what that question is about. And is there anything else? So that when we address it, we are doing that in the context of addressing everything holistically, not just one thing at a time, especially if it's a negotiated tactic. But we want to know, do you have any questions? Is there anything I can clarify for you? And address any and all of those questions as they come up. And then last but not least, could we be blindsided? Could we be blindsided? I mentioned the cutoff date earlier, but there are more sales reps that have often been unexpectedly blindsided this time of year than in any other time of year. And we want to understand that. Who's got vacation planned? Who all needs to be involved in this process? And understanding that so we can manage it effectively. You want to know today if there are artificial deadlines and timing things on their calendars that you need to be aware of. You don't want to wait until you reach out to somebody on December 21st, only to find out that that person is, off for 2 weeks. Or, I used to say skiing for 2 weeks, but who knows who's going where right now, but they still could be out of the office. So we want to make sure we understand that. So focus on asking the deliberate questions. Even the questions that seem silly, do you have any time out of the office planned? Is there anybody else that needs to be involved that might have out of the office planned? Just to understand that so you don't find yourself blindsided. It has happened to more reps than I can count. And it's heartbreaking when the deal that you need to get you to President's Club or Winner's Circle or Circle of Excellence is closing now on January 5th because somebody was on vacation on December 28th. So that's kind of the recap of the 5 areas that we think you should be looking at for every opportunity that you are expecting, anticipating, and driving to close. Close is not an event. It is the natural outcome of a well-executed sales cycle that reverse engineers how the buyers buy. And we activate that through our questioning process and understanding what's important to the individual buyers that we're talking with. So how can I take this and move into it today? Well, here's what you need to do. I think today is a perfect day to start to look at the top deals in your pipeline and understand what do you need to do to advance that deal and close it before the December 31st or whatever your deadline is that's coming up for your quarter close. And then ask the questions and really be honest with yourself. And don't beat yourself up over the holes or missing components. Be excited and embrace that white space that I know it today, and I'm not being surprised by it or blindsided by it in the future. And then get to work. Get the call, make the call, get on the phone, fill the gaps, ask the questions, identify what is winnable or not winnable by the 31st. As Julie Bregan alluded to at the beginning, if it's not winnable in the 31st, that's great. Love that prospect. Bless them, release them, wish them a happy holidays, and get back in touch with them after the first of the year. Time is too precious for you to be chasing and spending a ton of your resource on deals that you know cannot close before the 31st. So it's a very important time for you to just be very deliberate with that as well.